So this week we're covering Chapter 3. Chapter 3 discusses demand, supply, and market equilibrium. We'll also take a look at efficiency and price controls such as floors and ceilings, and the changes demand and supply have on market equilibrium. So the first concept we have to get through is the idea of the market, right? In this one we're saying there's an interaction between the buyers and the sellers. The buyers are those that demand something, the sellers are those that supply something. And then price is discovered between the interactions of the buyers and sellers. Demand is simply your willingness to purchase something at various price points. If there were 50 pizzas available and you had, say, whatever amount of money it was, but the price of the pizzas was $0, right? So $0, how many pizzas would you get? Well, if the maximum supply is 50, you'll take all 50 pizzas. If the price of that pizza is $100, I'm assuming no one's willing to pay $100 for a pizza. Therefore, the quantity demanded is 0. You can actually plot out the various prices and quantity demanded at various price points and then plot this on a graph. This is your demand curve. So a demand curve looks like this. So at various price points P, you demand various quantities Q. So at the price point of $5, quantity demanded is $10. At the price point of $4, our quantity demanded is 20. You'll notice that the change is 10. Okay, so as the price decreases to $4, our quantity demand increases by $10. Now, as price decreases by another $1 from $4 to $3, the shift along the x-axis of Q, quantity demand, actually increases. Right? Quantity increases by 15. At $2, the shift is 20 to 55. At $1, the shift is 25 to 80. Now, one of the problems you look at in the chapter or in the problem set this week is looking at the individual versus aggregate market demand. So, aggregate market demand. So let's say a price per bushel of $1. What's the individual market? Right? Joe individually wants 80. Jen individually wants 87. Jay individually wants 54. Now, the entire quantity demanded, or the total QD, right, for the week, of all the individuals in the market, so the aggregate demand is 221 bushels. The same thing at $5, right? The individual market for Joe is 10 bushels. The market for Jen is 12 bushels, and for Jay is 8 bushels. The aggregate market demand at $5 in bushels is 30 bushels. Now, as we look at changes in demand, right? Changes in the demand for, in this instance, corn, can be brought about by changes in one or more of the determinants. Okay, we'll talk about determinants in the next slide. So this change is indicated by a shift. Now, the shift can either happen to the right, which is an increase in demand, or to the left, which indicates a decrease in demand. Now, we have to be careful, right? These changes in demand are to be distinguished from the idea of a change in quantity demanded, right, which is caused by a change in the price of the product. So as we move from, say, point here to the point here, along the same demand curve, right, there was a change in quantity demanded that was brought about because there was a change in price. Change in price from $1 to $2. Now, we talked about the determinants of demand, right? This is included by the change in consumer tastes and preferences. If you can say that there's a change in taste which prefers one good or a particular good, the demand for that good will increase, right? If it's a unfavorable change for that, the demand will fall. There's another one in which there is the change in the number of buyers, right? We'll look at this a little bit more for one of the discussion questions when we're talking about tuition and college enrollment. But if there are more buyers in the market, demand will increase. Whereas if there are fewer buyers in the market, demand will decrease. There's also a change in income, but this affects goods in two different ways. A normal good, right, we buy fewer normal goods when our income decreases. Or we also buy more normal goods when our income increases. Think of it like movie tickets or sports tickets, right? As your income increases, you're more likely to purchase those items because they're expensive and you need more money to purchase them. Whereas if your income increases, you're less likely to buy ramen because it's a cheap staple food and you can afford burgers now, right? The sports tickets are a normal good, but ramen can be considered an inferior good. Now some other ones are the changes in price of related goods. And again, there's two different sets: complementary goods and substitute goods. Right? So when the price of one complement increases, the demand for the other complement decreases. Or conversely, when the price of one complement decreases, the demand for the other complement increases. So let's say cell phones and cell phone service and tuition and textbooks, right? Now, substitute goods are goods that we use in place of one another. A perfect substitute is a good that we use in place of the other without any loss of satisfaction. If the price of one good increases, the demand for the substitute increases as well. If the price of one good decreases, the demand for the other substitute decreases as well. So think of like toothpaste, right? If the price of Colgate increases, right, it means that it's becoming more expensive. The demand for substitutes increase. So Crest. Or if all things are being equal, let's say the various brands of milk, right? So as the price of 1 gallon of milk increases, the demand for all the other gallons of milk increases because their price is actually now cheaper than the brand that increased their price. And one of the last determinants is the change in consumer expectations, right? We're talking about future prices and our future income. If we expect the future price of an item to be higher, it increases our current demand for the product, right? If we expect a future price of the product to be cheaper or lower, it decreases the demand for the product. If I'm going on a trip and I expect the price to increase the closer to the time of the trip becomes, right, I'm more likely to purchase the ticket earlier when the price is low. Or if I can assume I can get into a show last minute for a really cheap price, I'll wait. So my demand will be low now and high in the future. This also relates to income. If you expect your income to rise, right, they might increase purchases now. Whereas if you believe your future income will be less, this reduces your demand for some products because you know you won't have the ability to pay it off. And here's just a nice little chart showing this as well. Now, supply on the other hand, right? We can do the same thing that we do with demand with supply, but supply is looking at the producer level. So if I can expect to sell something for a certain price point, I'm willing to reduce X number of those items. Say if I'm making pizzas, right? If I can sell those pizzas for $0, in other words, I'm selling them for free, giving them away, I'm not going to make any because I'm making no money. Right? If those pizzas cost me $2 to make, I'm not going to sell any until I reach above that $2 mark, in which I can start making some money. And then as the price increases, I'm more willing to supply more and more and more up to my production capacity or my possibility frontier. So at $100 for a piece of pie, right, an entire pizza, I will produce my maximum quantity because I want to sell, if I can, every pizza I can make for $100 and maximize my profits. And again, we can consider individual supply as well as market supply. So looking at the supply curve, right, we have our y-axis of price again, our x-axis of quantity, and at some price point we want a certain quantity, or we're willing to produce a certain quantity. So at price point of 1, we're willing to produce or supply 5 bushels of corn. And as our price point increases, the more we're willing to supply. At $5, we're willing to supply the most amount of corn that we possibly can at 60 bushels per week. Now, the same thing we had in changes in demand can happen in supply. Right? Our supply curve can shift to the right to indicate an increase in the supply, or shift to the left to indicate a decrease in supply. Right? And again, this has to be noted, right? It's different from a change in quantity supplied, right? Just as a change in demand requested or needed, that was brought about by a price point change, right? Along the same demand curve. Here it's the same thing. As the price changes from, say, $5, right, to $4, the amount of quantity supplied changes with it. Just as we had determinants of demand, we also have determinants of supply. And this becomes resource prices, right? As it costs less for us to produce it, we're more willing to supply at lower prices. The same thing with technology. Technology generally means it's cheaper to produce, we're willing to supply more of it sooner. The number of sellers, so supply increases, right, with the number of sellers increasing. Because there's more people selling the product. Right? Economic profits in the market draw producers from less profitable markets into this market. And conversely, if the number of sellers decreases, supply decreases. Changes in taxes and subsidies, right? If taxes are decreased or eliminated on a specific product, right, supply increases. If subsidies are increased on a certain product, supply increases. So the difference between taxes, right, is something added to the price. Subsidies are taken away from the price. Change in prices of other goods. So if the price of another good that a producer could produce with the same resources rises, the supply decreases for the product the producers are currently producing. Right? If the price of another good that a producer could produce with the same resources falls, the supply increases for the product the producers are currently producing. There's also a change in producer expectations, right? If I'm expecting demand to be higher in the future, I'll cut back on my current supply, stock up, decrease the supply available to everybody, and then when prices go up, I'll increase my supply to capitalize on the market change. So what comes together is we have two lines that cross, and the point where these two lines cross is called market equilibrium. Right, and this is the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And the problem here is, if we look on this curve, this right here is equilibrium price. It's where the two lines meet. Right, it optimizes our quantity demanded as well as our price. So the problem then is, we get into the idea of a surplus or a shortage. So here, equilibrium is at $3. So at $3, right, they want 7,000 bushels. Well, what happens if the price goes to $4? Right? So at $4, we're willing to supply, go over here, $4 to our supply line, 10,000 bushels. But yet, demand is only 4,000 bushels. So people only bought 4,000 of our 10,000 bushels produced. Means we had 6,000 extra bushels left over. Conversely, if we're at $2 here, the demand, right, on the green slope here, demand, $2 is all the way over here at 11,000 bushels. And yet, we're looking at supply over here in the red line at $2. we're only looking at 4,000 bushels supplied. It means we provided 4,000 bushels when people wanted 11,000. We were short by 7,000 bushels. Any price point or any combination of price and demand outside of equilibrium will lead to either some shortage or some surplus. Now, this allows us to produce efficiently and allocate efficiently. Again, this is just an animation showing the overlay of demand, the overlay of supply, and then the equilibrium point. Difference in surplus, right, is when supply exceeds demand. A shortage is when demand exceeds supply. Now, right, prices can have a rationing function. Right, the ability of competitive forces of demand and supply to establish a price at which buying and selling are consistent. Right, prices automatically rise and fall and bring a market closer to equilibrium. And prices are the best tools for limiting market shortages and surpluses. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next chapters. Now, changes in demand and equilibrium. What you're seeing here, okay, so we have some supply curve, right, and this is equilibrium. As demand increases, demand shifts to the right. Therefore, our equilibrium point shifts as well. It shifts higher up on the supply line, which means price increases from the original point as well as quantity increases from the original point. On the other hand, right, if we start at some point here, D3, and there's a decrease in demand, decrease in the overall amount of demand, the demand line is going to shift to the left, right, which means the point at which the two lines cross or meet will be lower and to the left. So if it's lower, it means the price will decrease, and if it's to the left, it means the demand decreases. Now, the same thing can happen with changes in supply. Right? We have our supply and demand curves here and some equilibrium point. If supply increases, there's a shift to the right. What happens to the point where the two lines meet? Well, it shifts down and to the right. If it shifts down, it means the price goes down. If it shifts to the right, it means quantity is increased. On the other hand, if they're going from some point here, right, and there's a decrease in supply, so well, the supply line will shift to the left, and therefore the point where the two lines cross will be up and to the left. Well, up on the y-axis means the price increases. Left on the x-axis means the quantity decreases. Now, one of the last concepts we're going to be talking about is government set prices. So one of the first ones is price ceiling, right? It means we're setting a price below the equilibrium price, right? This creates rationing problems. It creates a black market. An example is rent control, right? It creates a chronic shortage, which makes it difficult to determine how to ration the limited output for all the consumers who are willing and able to buy the good. Right, the shortages often lead to black markets where the good is sold at a higher price than the price ceiling, and price ceilings distort the efficient allocation of resources. So again, we have our demand line and our supply line in some equilibrium point. Right, so at 350 is where they're saying it's our equilibrium point. Well, suddenly we have a price ceiling saying we can't charge more than $3. Well, what happens? It creates a shortage. At $3, more people want whatever it is than we are willing to supply. Right? It creates a persistent product shortage. Now, conversely, we can set price floors. right? Prices are set above the market price, and it creates chronic surpluses, right? It's a minimum price fixed by the government. Now, to view that, right, we have our demand line, supply line, where the two meet is equilibrium. So say $2. Well, suddenly, or we'll say this is $2 an hour, suddenly we set the floor or minimum wage at $3. So, at $3, right, we're willing to supply a certain amount. Well, what's the demand? The demand's over here. Okay, so when the price floor is above the equilibrium price, a persistent product surplus results. Now, if you want to watch these last two slides or go through them on your own, you can use this to discuss the student loan crisis in the discussion board as well. What this is saying, though, is government subsidization, right, made the loans more affordable because now the loans can be offered at lower interest rates and with fewer credit checks. The increase in tuition costs over time was incorrectly assumed to be from outside factors like paying higher salaries to faculty, installing new technology, adding more staff to other career advisement and tutoring programs. Now, one alternative is for the government to set up programs to increase the supply of education, which would cause the supply curve to shift to the right, causing the equilibrium price to fall. This is what contributed to the rapid expansion of the state university system after World War II.